The one that seems to have been highlighted on social media and is the one that everyone's gravitated towards is that, I don't know what it is, 90 seconds, where McCartney, quite early on in the film, just starts strumming his bass guitar. And it is literally just strumming a bass guitar. And miraculously, over about a 60-second period, what seems to emerge is the beginning of Get Back.
Yeah, because he's playing with the melody, and he's sort of going up and down. And like he does, he throws words in just to fill in for what he's doing. And then, as you can see, just suddenly, and I think that's probably for me is the beauty of this whole thing. From the early in the process, a song starts to emerge. By the end of the third one, they're performing it live. And it's become one of the most recognisable Beatles songs. And I think, for once, actually seeing the evolution of a song is something we've never been privy to before. And this whole idea of how Lennon and McCartney write their songs, it's always been quite a black and white process. Where Paul will say, well, I've got this part of a song, then I play that to John, and John has some ideas, and we come up with that. But what you actually see is there's a melody and a tune coming here, bit of a concept, but the two of them then working, and it's over a period of time. Lyrics then appear, then they're tweaking the lyrics and the chords, and George and Ringo are involved as well. And I think for the first time we've actually seen the Beatles songwriting process.
Yeah, one of the incredible things is that they had I suppose you'd say, the confidence to allow a film crew in, for the period that they did, because they're there for about 30 days, aren't they? And the fact that when they go into that rehearsal space, originally it's Twickenham Studios, isn't it? Which is quite an alien space, really.
Yeah.
And they're prepared to almost, bearing their souls is slightly over-egging it, but they are prepared to be in that process of conjuring something out of nothing, when inevitably the first few passes of it don't sound that great. You got the smattering of a song, but you're actually seeing the ideas come to fruition. Now, for me, if I was in that position, I would think that's quite a personal, a thing that you wouldn't normally want to expose yourself doing to the world. And yet, obviously, they've had the confidence where they can do that.
They have, and maybe this, it crops up a few times, their nervousness about playing a set, playing live in front of an audience, because they've not done that since the end of August '66. Apart from what sparks this, which is filming the video for Hey Jude in Twickenham Studios. So to go from not doing any concerts to suddenly everything you're doing and saying being captured, good and bad, as we find out. I'm amazed they did it, personally. Yeah. I think it's a brave idea, and I think they've just gone with it. But
and interestingly, in terms of putting that into a modern televisual genre, essentially what they've created is the first form of reality television. The fact that there's 4, 5, maybe 6 cameras pointing at this group of people constantly for 30 days, and they have become the actors within the scene. You've got this range of supporting characters like Mal Evans, like George Martin. Even the director himself, Lindsay-Hogg, makes an appearance, sucking on a ridiculously large cigar and looking like a sixth former who's having his first smoke. And that kind of arena has become the centre of reality television.
Yeah, because it hadn't been done before, and I don't think any other group, if they were offered that chance, would do that.
No.
Warts and all.
No.
And again, it's not just the cameras, it's the microphones. And at certain times, they're obviously very, very conscious that those cameras are there, and they play up to it. Yeah. But after a while, that's it, that they forget, and they're doing their thing.
And the other interesting thing I think is, okay, so the 4 people at the centre of this film are the Beatles, but actually what we're seeing is a bunch of mates who are getting on with each other. There's the odd spark of a little bit of an argument here and there, and obviously, George throws his dummy out the pram for a little bit and disappears, but they go off and bring him back. And it seems to me that although the original film was always caricatured as the demise of the Beatles. These still seem to me to be four young men who are enjoying each other's company broadly and having a great laugh working some stuff out for a new album.
I think Let It Be, the original film, has been misremembered. I think because all we've talked about over the years is, George's thing to Paul, look, I'll just play whatever you want me to play, or I won't play at all. And then we know he walks out. That seems to be all people have talked about. It's that incident and the fact that Yoko was always in the studio with them. Whereas actually, I went back and watched Let It Be, and it's totally different to how I remembered it. And I think maybe because they've concentrated for so long, there are these couple of negative bits in there. People have dismissed it. Whereas actually, exactly as you say, this is a gang of mates. And it goes a bit goonish at times. When either they're remembering songs from when they were first starting writing, or quite often they're going back to Hamburg, and reverting to rock and roll. And they're just having a jam session. They're just having fun.
Yeah, and one of the things about it, I think, is that if that was just a gang of mates, you'd want to be in that gang of mates, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, definitely.
If you saw those four lads in a pub, you'd go over and say hello and start having a chat with them.
Yeah.
And the other thing that struck me absolutely is that the contrast, and we're jumping forward a little bit, but when they go out on the roof and they do the performance there, and then almost for the first time, the camera then goes into London. Yeah. And we see the London of 1969, and the contrast between the dress and the attitude and just the style and the demeanour of the four Beatles compared to the people in the streets of London who look like they're from 1969. You've got a couple of bowler-hatted business people there, you've got a taxi driver, a vicar, you've got some young women who presumably work in an office around there. And it's almost as though you feel that these four lads have been somehow teleported in from the 21st century into 1969 because they look so modern and they look so in tune to our lives, which are now, 40 years later, 50 years later?
Yeah. I think it's also that it's almost like how they're dressed, how their performance in colour. When you go down there, that's all in black and white. It's like it's, as you say, it's a completely different world.
And the beauty of those two policemen, the PCs who kind of stumble into the building and almost apologetically say, you've got to turn this off now. And obviously don't know what to do. They've never been presented with this sort of situation before. And they finally get themselves up on the roof and they just don't know what to do.
No.
And there's that little kind of sniggering, naughty teenagerness about the Beatles then. As McCartney's looking around thinking, we've got the police here, this is great. This is going to look great on the film. And they are naughty teenagers at that point.
Well, I think they always were. And you see that so many times when they're getting a bit bored or frustrated. And then one of them just starts either playing a different arrangement of one of the songs they're practicing, or mad arrangements of songs they've recorded, or just the stuff they remembered as kids. And they just then go off playing and doing silly voices and silly songs and just remembering what it was like to play as a band. Because they hadn't done that for so long.
Yeah. And during the 60s, the Beatles became associated with drug taking.
Yeah.
So, smoking dope, taking LSD, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, all that kind of stuff. And yet, for me, this album, these sessions, were not fueled by alcohol. They weren't fueled by drugs. They were fueled by tea, toast and marmalade.
And the occasional glass of wine.
And that is so English. How many cups of tea were drunk during that film? I think there's a PhD for someone to actually count the number of cups of tea drunk.
Now, it was interesting to see, when they send out for their sandwiches and their drinks and stuff. In the fact having glasses of wine, which is very different to Hamburg and those early days. But it is quite refined, isn't it?
So, I think, Lindsay-Hogg in the film, he's an odd character in the film, but hats off to him. He managed to engineer a situation where he was allowed to point 4 or 5 cameras at these 4 lads going through this process for about 30 days. And the richness of material that has come out of that is just unbelievable. If you're a Beatles fan. If you're not a Beatles fan and you just want to dip into it, there's a lot of stuff there to wade through.
I'd probably say, if you're not a Beatles fan, probably stick with Let It Be. the original film. That tells you enough of it. But as you say, Michael Lindsay-Hogg, youngish guy, he's got in there. And I was amazed at how involved he's been in the whole process. Obviously when they're talking about where they're going to perform this live show, because for him it's all about, here's the rehearsals, but it's all building up to the live show.
He wants to take him to Africa, doesn't he? To some kind of Roman amphitheatre in, was it Tangier or somewhere like that? Yeah,
and because that other thing, let's do somewhere grand. Do we do it on an ocean liner or something like that? Because it had to be a big statement. And they even, as we find, the day before they actually go onto the roof, they're still unsure if they're going to do that. So it's not like here's the idea, right, we're going to do it. Everything, and I think maybe that's the beauty of this whole process, it was starting with nothing and seeing where it took them. And it went to places they probably didn't expect.
And I think that obviously 4 lads who are missing their manager as well, they're missing Epstein. Because there is a lack of direction at the beginning, isn't there?
I think all the way through.
Yeah.
There was a number of times, I think, because by this time Paul's trying to drive and keep the Beatles together doing stuff. He's done saying, look, we need somebody. He said, and it can't be me. We need somebody just to say to us, you need to be there at this time and to do this. So because it just becomes chaos then and nothing's getting done. And the deadline, it got moved a number of times, but we're getting closer to that. We haven't even really got 3 or 4 songs ready. We certainly haven't got 14. And it needs some discipline. And that's what Brian brought to them all the way through. When they're doing their concerts, here's your set list. You're here at this time. This is what you're going to do. And that's all it had to be, a typed up piece of paper. But they knew that's what they were supposed to do.
And in terms of bringing some sort of structure, we've got the Get Back moment where we see that emerging from the bass guitar. And then the other moment for me is, I think it's John Lennon brilliantly kind of says, the electric piano, they've all got them on stage. We should have one of those. He's obviously been looking at other bands and thinking, well, they've got one, why can't we have one? And then Billy Preston appears, and it's like the whole thing changes. There's smiles on the faces, and suddenly what before was a fairly thin brew of music, suddenly all gets pulled together, and there's that beautiful, soulless, soulful, almost gospel-y kind of thing coming from Billy Preston.
And that was it. And I'd always wondered how that had happened. And again, it's one of those things that passes down in time. They say, George Harrison was most keen to have him there to diffuse some of the tension. And he just turns up because he's over here and you've got a couple of days spare and he wants to pop in and see his friends. Because, of course, they've been friends from Hamburg. And it was just obvious as soon as he's in there, they'd been missing a 5th musician. Because they kept saying, whatever we do, we've got to be able to perform live. And George is saying, well, if I'm doing this, I can't be doing lead guitar. So do we bring Eric Clapton in? Or if Paul, well, if you're doing bass, who's playing the piano? Or if you're playing piano, etc. There was this need for a 5th musician. And he was the perfect person because he's come in there. They're already good friends. And it's like he's been with them for so long. And as you say, he's got this amazing way of playing. And he's just so chilled and so relaxed. I think that takes the tension down.
Absolutely. And he comes in with a smile on his face and they start smiling. And there's a definite step change in the film at that point, I think. It's interesting that, obviously this has been put in the hands of a modern filmmaker. And one of the things that the 3 episodes does is it falls back on that idea of trying to create jeopardy at the end of each one. So at the end of part 1, it's George has gone. Will they get George back or not? Tune in next time and you'll find out. And then I think at the end of 2, I think that finishes with some sort of text that says, they've decided to do this live performance in 3 days. And there's like, will they do it, won't they do it? So there's all this kind of modern televisual sensibility that's been brought to this footage shot in 1969, which is incredible, really.
So my question for you is, as a film director, is what Peter Jackson's done the work of a director or the work of an editor using what Michael Lindsay-Hogg has directed?
Oh, God, what a question that is. Well, you got to look at what the function of director is first, haven't you? So one of the functions of a director is to work with camera operators to get the best material they can possibly get. And obviously Lindsay-Hogg was directing that process. Yeah. He chose some camera people. He chose the kind of the formula of the film in terms of it was going to be shot on 16mm, it was going to be a multi-camera shoot. Yeah. I think probably he negotiated his way into the Twickenham studio. And I can see actually from his point of view, he was thinking, I've got a bit of elbow space there. Yeah. I can actually get camera operators around this group of people. And for him as a filmmaker, that makes sense. Yeah. But for them as musicians, it didn't. No. And they're obviously much happier when they go into the Apple studio. So, but then he copes with that. Yeah. So he undoubtedly, there is a directorial stamp on this film from the person who generated the original footage. Then Peter Jackson turns up, views the footage, and one of the other roles of a director is to create a narrative structure. So what Peter Jackson has brought to it is maybe not a completely different narrative structure to the one that Lindsay-Hogg did, but obviously he's expanded it out. He's brought in these jeopardy moments. He's chosen a style of editing, which I think works really well if you're a Beatles nut and you want more and more and more and more stuff. Definitely. So I would say that the footage that was presented to Jackson had already had a directorial stamp on it. Yeah. And then he brought his own directorial stamp in the edit. So in a way, there's two directors at work.